Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 645. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Of course, there is a ton of news to talk about in today's show, but before I get into that, I need to mention the Libertarian Institute fundraiser. We actually have more matching funds now, $20,000 total in matching funds. And so if our just regular contributors head on over and make a $10, $20, $50 donation, that will be doubled. So it's a great way to help out the fundraiser. And of course, you get great kickbacks as well. We publish a lot of books at the Libertarian Institute, which we offer for free during our fundraisers as kickbacks. And so if you want to read Tom Woods or Lori Calhoun's book on COVID that we published in the last year, the latest book by James Bovard, or any of Scott Horton's previous books, you go to the Libertarian Institute, you can make a contribution, you could get yourself either an ebook version or an actual physical copy of one of those books. And of course, not everybody could donate, so just do what you can to share out the show and to promote the Institute, especially during our fundraiser, to help get more eyes on our content and hopefully a couple more contributions in. So we could, and not only at the Institute are we just maintaining, we are really growing. We continue to add, new staff members who produce tons of great content, write a new book. And so there's just so much more now at the Institute than there was even 2 or 3 years ago. So help us to continue to grow and to become just a louder and more essential voice in the liberty movement. Libertarianinstitute.org/donate. Of course, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle is where you essentially find all my work, this show, the daily news roundup that I do, all the news articles that I write. Usually, we're looking between like 5 and 8 news articles a week that I'm putting out for the Institute. Oh, and you could also sign up for the Institute newsletter, which I am now writing. It gets sent out every morning, so you will get one pretty shortly after the release of the show every day, with my take on something, and it might be other than foreign policy. So let's get into the news today. First up here, Netanyahu upset with Vice President Harris's remarks after meeting. So I wrote this one for antiwar.com on July 26th. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reportedly upset with Vice President Kamala Harris's remarks after the two met in Washington. After the meeting, Harris said it was time for a ceasefire in Gaza. Netanyahu claims her statement set back any potential agreement with Hamas. So on Thursday, Netanyahu held separate meetings with President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. After his sit-down with Netanyahu, Harris reaffirmed that she is committed to arming and supporting Israel. However, she also called for a ceasefire and expressed that too many Palestinians have been killed. According to Israeli officials speaking with Axios, Harris's remarks irked the Israeli leader. One official said Netanyahu was taken aback by her tone following their discussion. They told the outlet Harris's statements after the meeting was much more critical than what she told Netanyahu in the meeting. Describing the meeting to reporters, Harris said, "I told him that I will always ensure that Israel is able to defend itself, including from Iran and Iran-backed militias such as Hezbollah and Hamas. From when I was a young girl collecting funds to plant trees for Israel, to my time in the United States, and now at the White House, I have unwavering commitment to the existence of the State of Israel, to its security, to the people of Israel." And one thing, I think what she's referring to there, when she collected money to plant trees in Israel, there's a charity that collects funds and they say, oh, we're going to plant trees in Israel. And, this sounds like a positive thing. Who doesn't want to plant a few trees? The problem is a lot of times these trees get planted strategically to cover up where Arab villages once were. And so this is a way of, further colonizing the land where they're greening it. And then if the Arabs want to go back to their ancestral village, it would require cutting down the trees. And so this is a way, to prevent the Arabs from being able to return home. The Israelis are willing to build their villages and then they're going to put trees around them as a way of, I guess, essentially claiming the land forever, even the land that they're not actively living on. So The vice president additionally called for an end to the war in Gaza. She said, "As I told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it's time to get this deal done. Let's get the deal done so we can get a ceasefire to end the war. Let's bring the hostages home, and let's provide much needed relief to the Palestinian people." Israeli officials said behind closed doors there was little differences between the prime minister's discussion with Biden and Harris. They told Axios that the sit down with Biden was much more constructive than the meeting with Harris, but stressed that the meeting with the vice president was intense or difficult. And I do imagine that even at Biden's old age, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe he does at this point have like full-blown dementia and he is really not there, but assuming that he is somewhat cognizant, I do imagine that Biden is probably more able to have a meaningful discussion on this issue than Harris is. And, if for no other reason, then this has been one of his top issues for 5 decades. And Harris has never really seemed to be able to articulate a particularly insightful position, a nuanced position on this. It's always, very broad strokes. She personalizes it to her, of course, but there's no detail on, I would provide Israel with these sets of weapons, or I would limit the Israeli weapons to this. It's just I support Israel fully. I'll give Israel everything they need, but I also want to say that I want a ceasefire. I do think it's very possible that Harris really doesn't want a ceasefire, and as was said by a senior U.S. official prior to the meeting between Harris and Netanyahu, there is no daylight between the president and the vice president on Israel. I think that the issue here is mostly rhetoric. I don't think that Harris coming in would issue some kind of change in policy. Now, I think this may be a rare mistake from Netanyahu to allow, and by the way, this was published by Barak Ravid at Axios, and so that does mean that this was an official leap from the Israeli government. He's a former member of the IDF. He received an award from President Biden during the Washington Correspondents' Dinner for his coverage here. And so obviously, this is a guy who reports on official leads. He doesn't get scoops and then report things that the Israeli government or the American government doesn't want to hear. Like, it's a part of his ideological mission to advance the state of Israel. And so, of course, what he's reporting are the official leads that are coming from the Israeli government. And so to me, this seems like a strategic mistake, because you're essentially, I think, bolstering Kamala Harris's election chances, and really her position probably isn't going to differ from Biden's at all. And so I think, if I were Netanyahu, I just would have said, behind closed doors, the president, the vice president sounded the same. That would be the way to go here. This is going to be something that I think adds to Kamala's Democratic base of support, right? People who support the vice president and want her to be more progressive and things. I think for the same reason, it's really foolish when the Republicans say, "Oh, this is the most left-wing senator in American history." She was a tough-on-crime prosecutor before she was a senator, right? She bragged about putting parents, or threatening to put parents in jail if their children were truant from school. She talked about and bragged about building more prisons than schools. She kept people in jail even though she knew they were innocent. She kept people in jail to use them as free or cheap prison labor, as firefighters and things like that. Very dangerous work for these prisoners. And of course, they get paid almost nothing for the service. And so it's really messed up system that's in practice by California, and that was fully supported by Kamala Harris when she was the prosecutor. And so I don't really think it made sense to portray her as this super soft leftist, and I think that's going to give her actually more support than if they just said that, "Oh, this is a Hillary Clinton centrist who is going to take marching orders from Israel and the deep state, just like Hillary would have," and that's the reason that you should oppose Harris. Now, let's see. I don't think there's anything else in this article I wanted to talk about. So yeah, let's move on here. Next up, the U.S. has sent Israel 28,000 and missiles since October 7th. So I wrote this one for the Institute on July 28th. The U.S. has delivered 25,000 bombs and 3,000 missiles to Israel since October 7th. The majority of the munitions are 2,000-pound unguided bombs that Tel Aviv has used during its onslaught in the Gaza Strip. So the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, that's JINSA, a pro-war neoconservative think tank based in Washington, issued a report on U.S. arms transfers to Israel since October 7th. JINSA reports Israel received 14,100 2,000-pound bombs, 8,200 500-pound bombs, 3,250-pound bombs, and 3,000 Hellfire missiles. The list includes those weapon shipments that have been publicly disclosed. Many of the arms sales Washington has approved for Tel Aviv are classified or secretive. In addition to the massive number of bombs, the U.S. has sent Israel 36,000 30-millimeter cannon rounds, 25 F-35s, 3,000 JDAM kits, and 1,800 M141 bunker buster munition, as well as 14,000 tank shells. Washington's military support for Tel Aviv has come almost without condition. President Joe Biden has suspended a single shipment of 1,800 2,000-pound bombs, but continued to ship Israel other munitions. And we have seen Israel use 2,000-pound bombs in recent weeks in Gaza, and since they have received 14,000 since the start of operations on October 7th, it's likely that they do have more. And this is what was reported by American and Israeli officials at the time when Biden was discussing suspending this one shipment of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, that Israel had everything it needed to wage the war in Gaza already. And so there wasn't going to be any limitations. Now, the fact that the Biden administration has already sent Israel 14,000 2,000-pound bombs should be very alarming and something that should raise a lot of questions. So these bombs, of course, are some of the biggest in the American arms arsenal. And they, American officials and former soldiers and military officials will often say that these are not meant for use in civilian areas. And Gaza is one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. And certainly as people have been displaced, a lot of them are living in tent camp cities now where these bombs would do even more damage. And there's, just less buildings to blow up in total. And so it's very worrisome that the Biden administration signed off on sending this many 2,000-pound bombs to Israel in the first place. Not that they've only suspended the last shipment of 1,800 of these bombs, which I'm guessing will end up getting approved at some point in the future here. So the American-made weapons have been used by the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, to devastate Gaza. In under 10 months, over 39,000 Palestinians have been killed, and that's an absolute minimum. Those are the bodies that have been recovered and reported. Many people's bodies have not been recovered. People just gunned down by the IDF and their bodies left to rot in the streets of Gaza until an Israeli bulldozer pushed them into a shallow grave. Those bodies will never end up getting counted, maybe ever. They're just going to be a part of, after this whole conflict is over, they're going to estimate an excess death toll from this war, and then they're going to have a general idea of how many Palestinians that Israel killed here. And of course, when you're dropping 2,000-pound bombs on densely packed areas, you have things like people just absolutely getting vaporized and blown into pieces that you cannot even locate. There was this recent story when Israel dropped 5 2,000-pound bombs on a region of Gaza. And in between, the first and the last strike, this one young woman reported that she saw a young child whose lower half had been completely blown off, and he was crawling on his hands. And then another bomb hit, and that child was just completely vaporized. And so this is going to happen where you're providing Israel with such large munitions. And again, this is the majority of them. 14,000, over 14,000 of these bombs have been 2,000-pound bombs. Why did the U.S. ever send those to Israel in the first place? There's been no questions about that whatsoever from no parts of the American political spectrum. It's only people who are within the independent media and, often called marginalized or called anti-Semitic, things like that. And these questions just never really have to get addressed in Washington. All right, next up, this one from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, July 28th. Druze mourn 12 children killed by rocket in Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. So on Sunday, members of the Arab Druze community in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights mourned 12 children who were killed when a rocket hit a soccer field in a village in the Golan Heights. Israel has pinned blame on the rocket strike on Hezbollah, which denies any responsibility. According to Axios, Hezbollah told the United Nations that an Israeli anti-rocket interceptor hit the soccer field. The U.S. is backing Israel's claim, with Secretary of State Andy Blinken saying there was every indication that Hezbollah was behind the strike. For its part, Syria has blamed the incident on Israel, saying the Israeli government was trying to use it to escalate in Lebanon. The Syrian Foreign Ministry said, according to the Cradle, as part of attempts to escalate the situation in the region, Israel has occupied the Israeli occupation entity committed a heinous crime on Saturday and then held the Lebanese National Resistance accountable for this crime. Israel captured the Golan Heights from Syria in 1967 and annexed the territory in 1981. Under international law, the territory is considered to be Syrian, and under Israeli occupation, in 2019, the U.S. became the first country besides Israel to recognize the Golan Heights as Israeli territory. According to CNN, the host of most of the Druze in the Golan Heights consider themselves Syrian and have rejected offers of Israeli citizenship. None of the 12 children who were killed were Israeli citizens. During the funeral, mourners protested the participation of the Israeli ministers, including Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. According to Turkish media, one protester shouted at him, "Get out of here, you criminal. We don't want you in the Golan." Israeli ministers attended the funeral despite requests from the community leaders not to come. So do not come. Given the sensitivity of the situation, we are asking not to turn this massacre into a political event. We demand quiet religious funerals according to Druze customs. The Druze Authority Forum said in a letter to the Israeli ministers. Israeli officials are threatening a major attack on Lebanon in response to the strike that killed the 12 children. The Israeli military launched strikes in southern Lebanon on Sunday, but more are expected. The Israeli Security Cabinet convened on Sunday to discuss a potential escalation, and the U.S. is reportedly warning against strikes on Beirut. A major Israeli attack could escalate the situation on the Israel-Lebanon border into a full-blown war. Since October 7th, Israel and Hezbollah have been trading strikes across the border almost every day. According to AFP, the strikes on southern Lebanon have killed at least 527 people, including 104 children. On the Israeli side, 18 soldiers and 24 civilians have been killed, a total that now includes the 12 Druze children. So, I mean, just absolutely horrible here, and I do think presents a real risk of major escalation of the conflict. Next up here, Netanyahu postpones the evacuation of 150 sick and wounded children from Gaza. So the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has delayed the evacuation of 150 sick and wounded Palestinian children from Gaza to the UAE, Israeli media reported on Sunday. A source told Haaretz that Netanyahu made the decision in response to the killing of 12 Arab Druze children in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Israel blamed the massacre on Hezbollah, while Hezbollah denied the accusations and said the children were hit with an Israeli air defense rocket. Netanyahu's decision to punish the sick and wounded children was denounced by the group of Physicians for Human Rights and called the move a cruel game by the Israeli government with children's lives. Last week, Haaretz reported that Netanyahu instructed his government to arrange transport of sick and wounded Palestinian children from Gaza to a third country for treatment. The first plane was due to take off on Monday, but the flight was canceled. Netanyahu also previously canceled a plan to set up a field hospital inside of Gaza to treat Gazan children. Some children have been evacuated through Egypt for medical care, but the Israeli capture of the Rafah border crossing on May 7th cut off that vital lifeline. And there's an entire school in Gaza, or not in Gaza, it's in Qatar, and I believe it's located at the site of a previous World Cup or Olympics event or something like that. And it's an entire camp to care for children that have amputations, and there's dozens at the time I saw a video, dozens of these, happy little children, running around playing soccer, things like that. It's absolutely good that the kids had this place, but it's just hard seeing all these kids with one no legs, one no arm, kids missing 3 limbs. It's absolutely so hard to look at these kids, even if they have a smile on their face, to know their lives are going to be so difficult. I mean, a lot of these children who have amputations are going to require multiple surgeries as their bodies continue to grow to deal with the amputations, and also have the lifelong disability of having an amputation. So Dave mentions at the end of his article here, Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza has been a war on children, who make up about half of Gaza's Strip population. According to Gaza's media office, 16,000 children have been killed by the Israeli assault, and another 38,000 have been wounded. We also know there's a Save the Children estimate that 4,000 Israeli kids, there are about 20,000 Israeli children missing, but they estimate about 4,000 of them are dead and buried underneath the rubble. We've also had reports from surgeons who are in Gaza to say that on a daily basis that they would get Gazan children that have sniper wounds. And these are not in any way, like a 16-year-old or even 13-year-old. They describe them as preteen. So under the age of 12, every single day, little boys and girls shot in the head by Israeli snipers. And I mean, it's really just unimaginable. You would think too that some of these children have, like the Israeli soldiers reported, they just shoot them and leave them to rot. And the only time they even bother to clean up the bodies is when an international aid convoy may be coming through. All right, so next up here, Erdogan says Turkey could enter Israel like it did in Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh. So on Sunday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan appeared to threaten military intervention against Israel, saying Turkey could enter Israel as it did in Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh. We must be very strong so that Israel can do these ridiculous things to Palestine. Just like we entered Karabakh, just like we entered Libya, we might do similar to them, Erdogan said in a televised address, adding, there is no reason we cannot do this. We must be strong so that we can take these steps. Starting in 2020, Turkey, a NATO member, began deploying military advisors and thousands of Syrian mercenaries to Libya to support the UN-backed government of national accord. Turkey also strongly backed Azerbaijan's 2020 assault on Nagorno-Karabakh by providing weapons and political support. The conflict ended in 2023 with Azerbaijan completely ethnic cleansing the over 100,000 ethnic Armenians who lived in Nagorno-Karabakh. Turkey denied it directly intervened in Nagorno-Karabakh during the 2020 war, but there were allegations that Ankara sent mercenaries from Syria to fight Azerbaijan. And so one would imagine what Turkey is really threatening is that he would back the Hezbollah fighters, maybe with Syrian mercenaries, which would of course be interesting because the Syrian mercenaries that Turkey bats are the Al-Qaeda shot fighters for al-Jilani in what was al-Nusra or al-Qaeda in Syria and has now been renamed several times. I think they're going by the acronym HTS, and they hold the Idlib province of Syria, which is not under control of Bashar al-Assad, who has Balabats in Syria. So I think there's maybe some issues with Erdogan's plan here. At the same time, you could imagine a situation where he's really just talking about sending arms to Hezbollah or something like that. Additionally, I could be misreading the situation. He could be talking about sending these fighters either to the West Bank or Gaza. I think they would run into some problems there. Traditionally, the Palestinian militant groups have not been welcoming to the jihadists, that they try to keep those people out. They might have their own branches of, Islamic military, command structures and things like that, but they are distinctly not jihadists, and particularly Hamas has not allowed jihadism or the Al-Qaeda types to take any root within Gaza. So I'm not quite sure what Erdogan is talking about here, what he could possibly be hoping to accomplish. The Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz wrote an interesting response on Twitter saying Erdogan follows the footsteps of Saddam Hussein and threatens to attack Israel. Just let him remember what happened there and how it ended. And I do think if maybe he was calculating that as a NATO ally, Turkey is, in a sense, regime change proof against the Americans, then he's a treaty ally of the United States. Israel isn't. And so maybe he feels like he's a step above Tel Aviv in the pecking order. I just don't think that's the case. I think that would be a bet I myself would not make if I were in Ankara. All right, next up here, Italy to restore diplomatic ties with Syria. So the Italian foreign minister has announced that Israel will appoint an ambassador to Syria for the first time in a dozen years. According to the Associated Press, the foreign minister said one reason why Rome was restoring ties with Damascus was to prevent Russia from monopolizing diplomatic efforts in the Middle Eastern country. The step to normalize relations with the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad comes after Italy and 7 other European Union members sent a letter to Josep Borrell, the European Union's foreign policy chief, urging a different approach towards Syria and reevaluating sanctions on the country. The foreign minister said that Israel received support to normalize with Syria from 7 other signatories to the letter, which include Austria, Croatia, Greece, the Czech Republic, Slovenia, Cyprus, and Slovakia. At least 5 European Union countries have some sort of diplomatic ties with the Assad government, including the Czech Republic, which never cut ties with Damascus, and Greece reopened its embassy in Damascus in 2021. The U.S. said that it strongly opposes other countries restoring ties with the Assad government, but that has not stopped a growing trend of normalization. More and more countries are accepting the latest regime change efforts against Assad has failed. Last year, Syria was readmitted to the Arab League, and Saudi Arabia reopened its embassy in Damascus. The U.S. maintains crippling economic sanctions on Syria that are designed to prevent the reconstruction of the country, which naturally has devastating impact on the civilian population. The U.S. also keeps occupying force of about 900 troops in eastern Syria and bats the Kurdish-backed SDF there. And this has presented some problems too. The Kurds commit a lot of human rights abuses, including they have this Al-Hol prison camp where they kept a bunch of wives and children of ISIS fighters. A lot of those children are now adults in squalor in this prison camps, and probably create a whole new generation of jihadists that they and the Syrian government are going to have to deal with. And the U.S. and then too, the Kurds are known for recruiting underage fighters, usually as young as 14 or 15, including little girls. And the occupation of this, about a quarter or a third of Syria, takes a lot of the economic productivity away from the country and makes it harder for Assad to be able to run his country, or give food and other things to the people of Syria. All right, last story up here today. This one's a little bit wild. Of course, the former president usually is. Trump said U.S. should wipe Iran off the face of the earth if he is assassinated. So, former President Donald Trump said in a post on his social media site, Truth Social, that the U.S. should wipe Iran off the face of the earth if he's ever assassinated. After the assassination attempt on Trump, CNN reported that the U.S. had intelligence from a single human source that Iran was plotting to kill him. The report offered no evidence, and Iran strongly denied the accusation, but that hasn't stopped the Iran hawks from using the claim to advance their agendas. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeated the claim during his address to Congress. In a post on Truth Social, Trump included a video of Netanyahu saying, "We recently learned that Iran was threatening to kill the former president." So this is interesting, and I really thought that maybe this was an indication that this human source actually was an Israeli source, that this is where that single source on the assassination, potential assassination of President Trump came from. So that's something to keep in mind if it was from Netanyahu or the Israelis. Trump wrote, "If they do assassinate President Trump, which is a possibility, I hope America obliterates Iran, wipes it off the face of the earth. If that does not happen, American leaders will be considered gutless cowards," Trump wrote. Trump made the post ahead of a Friday meeting with Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida. During Netanyahu's visit to the resort, Trump denied rumors that his relationship with the Israeli leader ever soured. "We always had a great relationship," Trump told reporters. "It was never bad." According to a readout of the meeting put out by on Trump's official website, Netanyahu thanked the former president for steps he took during his time in office, including the assassination of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, which brought the U.S. and Iran to the brink of war. So this was a readout. Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked President Trump and his administration for working to promote stability in the region. Among many historic achievements, the Abraham Accords, moving the United States Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, eliminating Qasem Soleimani, ending the horrific Iran nuclear deal, as well as combating anti-Semitism abroad. After the meeting, Trump took aim at Vice President Kamala Harris, who met with Netanyahu on Thursday. Israeli leaders were reportedly upset over her public remarks. After the meeting, Harris pledged strong support for Israel, but also said Netanyahu needs to get a deal done with Hamas and get a ceasefire to end the war. So, I guess I would just add here a couple things. It was reported that the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu was strained after Netanyahu called and endorsed and congratulated Joe Biden, I guess would be the way to say it, victory over Donald Trump in the 2020 elections. And of course, at that time, Trump was still claiming that, and I guess he still claims that he was the rightfully elected president there. So, that was said to have presented some issues. I'm not sure if that's the case or not. And then the last thing I will add is, of course, that this is really disappointing, that for what happened, that Trump was nearly killed. And it seems that the best take that you could possibly have is that the Secret Service royally screwed up, if not intentionally did so. And rather than Trump being upset at the White House or the Secret Service, he's, of course, taking aim at Iran over this. For a minute or for maybe a week after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, you imagined the blood streaming down his face, the American flag in the background, the Secret Service agents gather around him, his fists pumped in the air, yelling "fight," that this was going to be a photo that certainly defined the 2024 election, which would mean Trump will win. But I really thought maybe the right-wing cultural shift this country seems to be going through, that would be a real defining image of it. And now, when we're less than even a month out from this assassination, I mean, it seems to be almost going the way of the memory hole. I saw a lot of people, asking AI programs. One asked, "Oh, what about the Trump assassination?" It says, "Oh, I'm not familiar with events that current." And then asked about the Harris campaign, which of course started after the Trump assassination. AI knew all about that. If you try to go to Google and assassination of President Donald, and you don't include Trump, it won't autofill that. And so it really does seem like there's an effort to downplay this assassination attempt. And Donald Trump is in a way participating in it by highlighting the Iran angle, which is just fake, rather than talking about what he needs to talk about, which is at the very least the failures of the incompetence of the Secret Service, if not larger questions to ask that agency. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. More later this week.